This took place several years ago, but even now, the memory leaves me with an uneasy knot in my stomach. I'm only sharing it because I believe enough time has gone by that nothing bad will come of posting it online. At the time, my wife and I had just transitioned from urban life to the suburbs. We had recently had our third child, and between the constant clutter, baby gear, and general chaos, our apartment had become stifling. We ended up buying a house in a peaceful, low-crime neighborhood. The kind of place, neighbors told us, where folks felt comfortable leaving their doors unlocked. The house wasn't enormous, but it was a definite upgrade from the tiny space we'd been crammed into. What really appealed to my wife was the backyard. It had a charming, slightly neglected garden with a handful of old stone figures scattered about. They were weather-worn and vaguely unsettling, like something lifted from a fantasy epic. Odd as it sounds, we were both drawn to them. My wife said they gave the yard personality. I didn't feel strongly either way and figured I'd leave them alone. It meant less effort for me. Just a few days after moving in, I was standing by the window, looking over the backyard, when something caught my attention. One of the statues, an angel I think, had its back turned to the house. The others were all facing inward, so it seemed out of place. I could have sworn they were originally all facing the same way, but I wasn't entirely sure. I dismissed it, thinking maybe I was just imagining things. The next morning I glanced out again, and this time I was certain. Another statue had shifted, also now turned away from the house. I was immediately on edge. I was absolutely positive something was going on. I brought it up to my wife, but she shrugged it off and said she hadn't noticed any difference. I considered the possibility that our son Jimmy might be behind it. He was quite the jokester at that age, always getting into mischief. But when I asked him, he just stared at me like I was crazy. Honestly, I didn't really believe he was responsible. Something strange was definitely happening, but I didn't have a way to prove it. I didn't want to overreact, so I tried to let it go. We had bigger issues to deal with anyway. As much as I hate to admit it, we were under a lot of financial pressure at the time. I was constantly worried I'd lose my job. A few uneventful days passed, and I started to calm down. But then one evening, I looked out the window and felt my blood run cold. All of the statues had been moved. They were now standing in a straight line at the edge of the house. It looked like a scene from a nightmare. I know it sounds strange, but it felt like every stone face was watching me. I could barely breathe. I wasn't sure whether to be terrified or just confused. I decided to go outside for a closer look. Before unlocking the back door, I scanned the yard anxiously. It was still light out, but I felt on edge. Eventually, I built up enough nerve to step outside and examine them. When I tried to lift one of the statues, I quickly realized something. They were incredibly heavy. There was no way a single person could move one on their own. I couldn't even shift it a few inches. As I stood there debating what to do next, my wife came outside. The expression on her face told me she was just as disturbed as I was. She floated the idea that maybe some neighbors were pulling a prank on us, trying to mess with the new people on the block. But that didn't add up. We had met most of the folks nearby, and they all seemed pretty average. Plus, I couldn't imagine anyone thinking this was funny, especially with kids in the house. It felt more like targeted harassment than a joke. We ended up contacting the police. As expected, they couldn't do much. They advised us to install security cameras, though we didn't have the budget for it. I told them we'd consider it, but truthfully, I wasn't ready to take that step. After they left, I felt slightly more at ease, though my wife remained shaken. We kept it all hidden from the children. Judge us if you want. We just didn't want to frighten them. The next few days were uneventful. I started to believe the presence of the police had scared off whoever was responsible. That seemed plausible. We began trying to move on, even though neither of us felt completely at peace. I kept telling myself maybe my wife had been right. Maybe it was just a weird prank. But that didn't really help. I was still on edge, constantly checking the windows, half expecting to see those statues rearranged again. There's nothing worse than feeling unsafe in your own home. More days passed quietly. For the first time in weeks, it actually felt like we might be able to settle in and feel at home. I was wrong. It was a weekend. Can't recall if it was Saturday or Sunday, but the kids were off school, so it must have been one of those. After breakfast, I headed out into the yard with the kids to play. That's when I saw it. Spray painted in bold black letters across the back wall of our house were the words, "Go away." I nearly dropped my son when I saw it. Instinctively, I rushed the kids inside and told my wife to stay put with them. I don't know what came over me. I'm not exactly a tough guy. But I sprinted into the yard, yelling threats at whoever had done it. My adrenaline was surging, and I was ready to fight. But the yard was empty. Eventually, I gave up looking. As I walked back toward the house, the adrenaline turned into a sickening fear. This wasn't just weird anymore. Someone had left a direct threat. Whoever it was clearly wanted us scared, and it was working. We called the police again, and they filed another report. But with no leads, there wasn't much else they could do. I begged them to keep a unit nearby, but they said they didn't have enough evidence to allocate resources that way. They suggested it could have just been some teenagers messing around. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They said they'd have someone patrol the area occasionally, which was better than nothing, I guess. My wife was even more upset than I was, so I reassured her the best I could, even though I was losing it inside. That night, I was in the kitchen when I heard my wife scream from the living room. I ran in to find her pointing at the window. I looked, and my heart dropped. There were 5 people in the backyard. They all wore white masks and were moving in a bizarre, twitchy way, like marionettes. We were too shocked to react. It was horrifying. I don't know what they were trying to do, but it was one of the most disturbing things I've ever witnessed. I snapped out of it, grabbed the largest kitchen knife I could find, and yelled at my wife to call the police. While she was on the phone, I bolted outside, screaming like a madman. I took a few steps toward them, then immediately realized my mistake. There were 5 of them, and just me. For all I knew, they were armed. I turned around and ran back inside, terrified. But maybe the knife startled them, because they stopped moving and fled into the garden, disappearing from sight. I told my wife to take the kids upstairs and hide, and I stayed by the back door in case they tried to break in. By the time the police arrived, those people were long gone. They searched the area thoroughly, but came up with nothing. That was the final straw. I didn't care what it cost. I bought and installed cameras the next day. My wife was distraught for weeks afterward, begging me to let us move. I told her if anything else happened, we would, but financially, it would wreck us. Thankfully, it never came to that. The cameras must have scared them off because nothing else ever occurred after that. The most terrifying part? We still live in that house, and we never found out who they were or why they came.